Well, Rishi Sunak, he's invited the best and brightest graduates from around the world to the UK. He says they can stay here with their families for at least 2 years.
Yes, addressing the Global Investment Summit, the Prime Minister proudly announced that the UK has the most competitive visa scheme for what he calls high-potential graduates. He said this in the last hour. Let's have a listen.
But we don't have a monopoly on talent in this country. And we recognise that nearly half of our most innovative companies have an immigrant founder. So if you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, a researcher, you should know that the most competitive visa regime for highly skilled international talent is right here in the UK. And let me just give you one example. Our new high potential individual visa means that if you're a young person who's graduated from a global top 50 university, you can just come to the UK and stay here with your family for 2 years to just explore, work, study, invent. Nothing like that exists anywhere else in the world.
But hang on a minute. Speaking before that, Sunak claimed he's taking action to reduce the number of dependents students can bring to the UK.
Well, it comes as the PM reportedly agreed to raise the salary threshold for migrants to £40,000 as part of a pact with Suella Braverman, a pact that she says he reneged on.
Yeah, so let's cross to Westminster and speak with our political correspondent, Olivia Utley, to make sense of this all. We're receiving quite a lot of mixed messages from the government, from the Prime Minister himself. He was saying that the current levels of immigration were not sustainable and that they were too high. Now he's lauding Britain for its liberal visa system when it comes to high potential students and their families.
Well, absolutely. As you say, it does feel like mixed messages. And I've spoken to quite a lot of Conservatives this morning who think that Rishi Sunak essentially just got the tone completely wrong. They think that although there might be merits to the scheme that he's talking about, this high potential individual scheme where graduates from the top 50 universities in the world can come over to Britain and live and work with their families, that might be a fine scheme in itself. But the week after we've heard of record high immigration figures of nearly 750,000, when most voters are concerned about that, talking about a scheme to essentially increase immigration doesn't seem to be striking the right message. And of course, the whole Global Investment Summit, the meeting that Rishi Sunak was speaking at this morning, has been rather overshadowed by this news, or allegations at least, that Suella Braverman did indeed write a document in which she laid out the 4 policies which Rishi Sunak would have to sign up to if she was to agree to be his Home Secretary. Now, one of those is doing something which it sounds as though the Prime Minister might be on the verge of doing, which is raise the threshold at which the salary threshold at which migrants can come over here from £25,000 to £40,000. There is also an element of that policy document which includes reducing the number of dependents that students can bring over here. Again, something which it sounds like James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak are going to do. Now, Suella Braverman's allies have made it clear that Rishi Sunak never actually signed this document, but they claim that he verbally agreed to it over and over again and then reneged on his promises once she had taken the job and once he felt as though he was in control again. That is not going to go down well with Suella Braverman allies, both in the House of Commons and outside of it. They will feel as though Rishi Sunak just didn't take immigration, legal immigration, seriously and prioritised stopping the boats above anything to do with legal immigration at all. They will feel like he is now trying to play catch up with these new measures, which it sounds like James Cleverly will be announcing soon. And the question for them will be, is it enough? Or at this point, is it too little too late?
It's fascinating, however, because if it's the case that Suella Braverman had this sort of document, this sort of deal with Rishi Sunak, and then he flagrantly ignored that deal, why didn't she do anything about it before today? Why wouldn't she have resigned in the well over a year that she was Home Secretary? It does sort of raise questions about whether or not Suella Braverman herself was so dedicated to this deal.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's a question that lots of Conservative MPs will be raising. In her resignation letter, that dramatic resignation letter a couple of weeks ago, she claimed that she was hoarse with shouting, essentially, at the Prime Minister about this, and that he kept promising that he was going to act and then failed to do so. As you say, I mean, if that had gone on for perhaps a month or two, one might understand. But given it was over a year of Suella Braverman being Home Secretary and apparently the Prime Minister still ignoring her, you would have thought that she would have resigned a little bit earlier rather than waiting to be sacked. I think that does take the wind out of her sails a little bit. The Prime Minister and his team, I mean, have been briefing very openly over the last couple of weeks that the problem with Suella Braverman wasn't her politics, it was simply that she was incompetent, that she didn't have the sort of temperament to be a good Home Secretary. And the fact that she let this linger on for whatever reason might actually play into that argument.
Well, there's a narrative building, isn't there, that Rishi Sunak isn't too bothered about getting those legal migration figures down. But it will be, as you mentioned, James Cleverly. He has his first question time as the new Home Secretary this afternoon. Now, he was criticised by some last week for appearing too relaxed as well about the legal migration figures, about those record high levels of immigration to this country. What might he be questioned on? What might he find difficult in the questions this afternoon?
Yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting to listen to what James Cleverly has to say this afternoon, because so far we don't really know where he stands on migration. As you say, he was criticised last week for seemingly not taking the legal migration issue seriously. He was also criticised for calling the Rwanda scheme something which I don't think I can repeat on TV. I think that what Conservatives will want this afternoon is for James Cleverly to get into the granular detail of how the government plans to reduce legal net migration. Will the government adopt some of those policies suggested demanded by Suella Braverman in that original letter? Will the threshold, the salary threshold at which a migrant can come to the UK increase by 50% from 25,000 to 40,000, as both Suella Braverman and Boris Johnson have argued for? Will the number of dependents be decreased? Will another demand that Suella Braverman made, will priority be given to students who are going to Russell Group universities rather than all students? And will, very importantly, that 2-year visa for students graduate visa for students who've studied in the UK to stay here and work here, will that be tightened up in some way? I think James Cleverly won't be able to get away with just making a sort of sweeping statement this afternoon. He will have to get into some detail, and it'll be fascinating to see where he stands.
Well, Olivia, we're expecting that at 2:30. We'll be dipping in and seeing what he says. But for now, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest from Westminster.
Yes, so joining us now is immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bhangal to get into the detail a bit about what Rishi Sunak had to say. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, Rishi Sunak said, we've known about this visa scheme for a little while, haven't we? But he said, if our new high potential visa means if you're a young person who has graduated from a top 50 university anywhere in the world, you can just come to the UK and stay here with your family for 2 years to work, study, invent, and so on. Do you think we can have such a scheme in place and also bring down legal immigration figures? Because there's huge amounts of pressure on the government to do so. But with such an open scheme to literally any person and their family who's gone to a top university, can we have those two things at the same time?
I don't think that this is a be-all and end-all on this in relation to the figures, because if you're going to a top 50 uni in the world, let's say I'm at the top 50 uni in America, why would I want to come to the UK when I know America pays more, they look after me more? In fact, we have a history of, if you look in the past few years, of all of our top doctors pretty much going to Australia and America and being poached because they pay more. So, I mean, if I've graduated from a top uni, if I'm, say, in a tech field, then America, Canada, Australia, and other places are going to be my destination, Japan. So I don't think we're going to see the large numbers for this. I think this was just said to show how flexible we are in relation to trying to recruit talent, when in reality, we actually have a skills shortage, especially in industries like the care and even in farming. If we have a look at that, we've got skills shortage, nursing, all over the shop. I think what's more, sort of alluded to, is people bringing their families over. Whereas if we're supposed to be allowing one student to come and study, and I'm sure when you lot went to uni, your whole family didn't go with you. When I went to uni, I didn't take my wife and kids with me. And even if I wanted to go uni now, say if I wanted to go from London to Newcastle, I'm going to make the effort to go home on the weekends, right? Like I'm sure yourselves did and I did. Even if you're moving abroad as uni, you don't bring 5 or 6 dependents with you. What we're seeing under the current system, which is due to change in January, is we've had people coming from, say, Nigeria and India coming to study by paying one set of fees, international fees, which is very high, which does bring money to the UK, but also bringing, say, 3 people with them. So
Harjap, how much do you think? Sorry, just very quickly. How much do you think student visas are abused? When students come to this country, some may enrol in a 3-4 year course and see through their student time here and then go back to their country of origin or go elsewhere or work here for a couple of years. How many students do you think sort of slip through the net and end up living here, not completing their studies?
We can't quantify it in figures, but because we don't have any exit systems, we don't have any exit controls in this country. You know, and I know, and your viewers know, when we leave the UK, say at Heathrow, there's no immigration there. Well, there is when we come in. So we don't know actually who's gone and left the UK until they're encountered by immigration. And there's no way that immigration can encounter hundreds of thousands of people. There is definitely a large number, I would say. I wouldn't say it's more than, say, 5-10%. But there are people who come here on student visas. They just don't turn up to university. And when the universities report them to immigration take ages to cancel their visas. So I often see cases where people came in 2021, didn't go to uni, and have still got a valid visa. It shows on the immigration website and their right to work that despite having not been to uni, they've still got a right to work and they can be here. And if I was an employer checking that on the right to work system, I would hire them on as a job and say, yeah, I would have no second inkling as to whether this person's been to uni or not. The Home Office are too slow to cancel their visas. Ideally, when a uni reports that this person hasn't turned up for 5 or so lectures, please cancel their visa. Then the next week, their visa should be cancelled. But the Home Office take years to cancel it. And even at the lowest, take months to cancel it. And that's the problem. And there are people that overstay and abuse the system. They then go on to have children. Those children develop rights. And that's definitely been happening, not from now, but that's been happening from the time since, say, 2009 and 2008.
No, and I would hasten to say that it's not the scheme that Rishi Sunak was talking about, where people from Harvard or MIT or Sciences Po come to the UK. That doesn't sound like it's particularly widely open to abuse. Perhaps it is those lower-ranking universities whereby there is more abuse. Just tell us a little bit about what this change is in January that is due to already come into force.
So the changes in January are going to be that if you're studying a bachelor's or a master's, you can't bring your dependents over. You can only bring them over if you're studying for a PhD, which perhaps would be for a maturer student who might have developed a family out there. If someone's studying a bachelor's, they'll be 18 or 19 usually. So, they wouldn't have a family. What's actually been happening is, because people have been allowed to bring their family over on masters, a market has developed in certain countries for fake marriages. So what would happen is, if I'm, say, a person who can't qualify for a visa for the UK, I would say I will get married to somebody who does qualify. I will enter into something called a fake marriage, referred to in some countries as a contract marriage, and which would involve me paying some fees, paying for the fees of the person who's actually going as a student, and they would then take me as their husband or wife over to the UK. As a dependent, I would have full-time permission to work. And then what happens is these couples, when they come here, they actually split up.
Wow.
They don't live with each other. So the person who's come over as a student has had all their fees paid for, literally is here free. The person who's come over and couldn't qualify, and he might not even pass his GCSEs, has managed to get into the UK and get full work rights. So that has developed in countries, in African countries, in Southeast Asian countries and South American countries. And that has become a trend. But this new system coming in January, that will cut that system out. and make sure that no one's coming in.
Amazing that the government seems to be aware of these fake schemes, and it's taking until next year to ban, but that is a significant change that could well have a big impact on these numbers.
Well, I remember Priti Patel talking about it all the time, the abuse of student visas and the like. But thank you very much for your time, Harjap Singh Bhangal, immigration lawyer. So it sounds as though the conclusion of that is that high potential graduates won't want to come here anyway. So we just get the ones who are abusing the system. Was that the conclusion there?
I thought the whole point of Brexit, at least in my mind, you want high-skilled people, perhaps you want fewer low-skilled people. That should be what's happened, but it looks like there's been a lot of abuse in these routes.
Yeah, but I would like it if we trained up people to be high-skilled who are already here, then we wouldn't have all the pressures.